England want our gold, they want our diamonds, and they burn everything down and take the women to the concentration camps, and they died.
I get very emotional at some of these places.
Why?
It's part of my heritage.
Here we are at a civilian monument.
What still upsets Charles Leach, and everyone else here, we discovered, is that Morant actually confessed to shooting up to a dozen unarmed Boer farmers and young boys, even though he insisted he was strictly following British orders.
He shot them in the back. They weren't prisoners. They weren't soldiers.
Why? Why?
They was innocent children.
What I know is that he was a murderer.
They were murders.
They were charged with 12 murders. My research shows 34. Insignificant in the grand total. But 100 years later, we're still talking about it? Insignificant? No, sir.
Who was a real war criminal? Was it Kitchener or Morant?
Well, technically speaking, the guy who gives the orders is the criminal. But the guy who takes those orders beyond the limit, I reckon he's also to blame.
He was absolutely ruthless, Kitchener. There's no question about it.
Finally, it comes down to whether we believe Breaker Morant and his Australians were following Lord Kitchener's orders when they killed the farmers. According to military academic Saul David, there's still no evidence of any such order. What sort of a bloke was Kitchener?
He was the sort of man that the British Army has often used when things get tough. He's the sort of man who gets things done, but when we look back at him in the cold light of history, we're pretty appalled. He's the sort of man that made the empire.
Why isn't there any evidence at all that Kitchener had this take no prisoners policy?
I think Kitchener was a very smart man. Kitchener knew that to order the shooting of Boer prisoners was indeed illegal and a controversial act, and that if he was going to practice it, he was going to practice it under the tables, so to speak.
They used to say that the sun never set on the British Empire. When it was going down here in South Africa, it was already tomorrow across the ocean in Australia. And as dawn awakens Canberra, Jim Uncles, along with relatives of Morant and his mates, have launched the Australian stage of their mission. They want the federal parliament to push the Brits for a pardon.
This case is an unjust stain on Australia's identity and military history. For the descendants, this matter has been a source of intense grief and personal interest. It's an historic moment. These men will finally receive a hearing that they really deserved back in 1902.
We've got to draw a line somewhere.
It seems a long-awaited victory. The committee from all sides of politics agree that Morant got a raw deal. And for the Australian relatives, it's been a family stain, almost a family shame, that has until now been locked away.
Justice delayed is justice denied, but today they're getting justice.
Brought it out in the open where it needs to be, because 108 years of injustice.
It's a new beginning, I think, and hopefully justice will be done.
But there'll certainly be no celebrations back in South Africa.
Because it was 11:05 on Saturday night, the 31st of May, that the peace treaty was signed.
Where Charles Leach and his countrymen gather against Jim Uncle's petition. They still bleed with emotion. They still live with what the British and the Breaker left behind. What would you feel if the British decide to pardon Morant and Hancock?
I'll be very upset if that happens. I will be very upset. That's not fair.
Why, Ronnie?
Because he murdered young children and unarmed soldiers.
What impact would it have on the British Army, on this sort of leadership, if these two colonials are granted a pardon?
I think it would send out a pretty chilling signal, actually, today, at a time when Western soldiers are fighting in places like Afghanistan now and recently in Iraq, when similar cases are coming up of the murder of unarmed prisoners of war, I think it would send out a very dangerous signal that such crimes, for whatever reason, are ever justified.
Would you make sure they're posted for me, please? And see that this gets published, eh? We poets do crave immortality, you know.
On his last night on Earth, Breaker Morant penned his final poem about the hypocrisy of Kitchener.
If you encounter any Boers, you really must not loot them. And if you wish to leave these shores, for pity's sake, don't shoot them.
Breaker Morant was refused any right of appeal. Neither his family nor the Australian government knew that he was about to die.
Well, Peter, this is what comes of empire building.
It's now up to the British government to decide if the case should be reviewed. There are precedents.
Come over here and have a talk about what's really important in your life. Justice.
But for Jim Uncles and for Nick, justice won't be done unless the verdicts are overturned, unless the sentences are quashed, and Breaker Morant and his mates are unconditionally pardoned by Queen Elizabeth herself.
Feel the weight of the jurisprudence. Absolutely. Take it back and show your family. It's 1902, madam. 1902.
108 years ago.
Yes, 108
You're a bit late in writing to someone to complain about it,
yes. What I am selling, though, is the truth. The truth is these men were executed unfairly. And the British...
So, Jim, this is the last stop for you.
Ray, the buck stops right there with Her Majesty.
What do you want from her?
I wanted to grant these pardons.
Do you dream that one day you'll have a cup of tea with Her Majesty?
I don't dream, I know I will.